speaker. Our next speaker is a chartered financial consultant and a certified financial planner. He gained his Master of Science in Financial Services and Master of Science in Management at the American College, USA, Master of Science in Financial Planning at the College of Financial Planning, USA, Bachelor of Business Administration at Thomas Edison State University, USA, and Bachelor of Science at the University of State of New York, USA. He is the Honorary Chairman of Singapore Professional Center, former President of Marua Society of Financial Services Professionals, former Chairman of the Institute of Administrative Management, former Honorary Consul of Jamaica and Burkina Faso, and founding advisor at the Financial Planning Association of Indonesia and Brunei. Let us give a round of applause to Honorable Dr. Fellow Leong Ze Yan.
I have been coming to the Philippines to speak so many times over the years, I have lost count. And my last speech, I think just before COVID, was at UP. Any UP graduates here? So I'm very happy to be back after COVID, as I celebrate my 70th birthday this month, to be back there to speak. I think I heard someone say Congressman Salvador Plato has 41 years of public service. Well, I was very jealous when I heard that, because it's going to be 70 this month. I only have 40 years, but not in public service, but service to the public. That's a lot of difference, right? Anyway, I was very happy to hear our keynote speaker, Congressman Joe Libre, talk about lifelong learning. In 1985, I was chairing a committee on continuing education, initiated by the Singapore Professional Center, which then comprised all the heads of the continuing education departments of the universities, polytechnics, Skills Development Fund, Singapore Institute of Management, National Productive Point, and so on. And so we came up with what we introduced the voluntary certification of continuing education and development in the professional scheme. Actually, what it means is continuing professional development that you have today. But it was very tough. We communicated with scores of professional bodies. We only managed to get about 10 to agree to participate. So today, fast forward today, it's mandatory for all the professions. I think Professor Lorna Dino said, education is not a press release, Right? So, as I'm going to tell you the story of Singapore's economic success miracle, you will see that it's not a smooth journey. There were many obstacles and many roadblocks. In my country, where I come from, it's customary to tell you a funny story before I start. In 2006, I came to Manila for my first ASEAN meeting. And so your Labour Secretary was talking about OFWs in Singapore. I think today we must have at least more than 300,000 Filipinos in Singapore. Of course, this is a secret that the government will never tell you. They say it's for national security reasons. We cannot tell you how many Filipinos, how many Indians, how many Chinese are in Singapore. So I was at this meeting, and then when your Labour Secretary finished his speech, Q&A, and so I asked, I said, Your Excellency, Why is it that a Filipino domestic worker who comes to Singapore has to work for free with no salary for 6 months? You see, they have to deduct the salary for the first 6 months to pay the agent's fees that brought them to Singapore in the first place. And so your labor secretary, we have no control of that. It is the receiving country's protocol and regulations. And so the government rep who was sitting next to me read out his prepared speech and said, we have prosecuted more employers in Singapore for ill treatment of domestic workers. We have many new programs. They must go through training to understand the rights and so on. And I said, and because of all this, they now work for 9 months without pay instead of 6 months. And everybody was laughing, but now nobody's laughing. Today, I'm going to talk about Deuterium, Philippines miracle, the Singapore economic success miracle. Can it be adapted to the Philippines? Next, please. Now, Deuterium has been a very controversial subject in the Philippines for decades. Let's look at I fact-checked the latest news about Deuterium. August 21st this year. Fact-check. Deuterium won't solve the Philippines' debt in a year. July 7 this year. Government launches hydrogen fuel cell research center. March 7 this year. The Philippines does not have huge deuterium deposits. October 14, Biden unveils hydrogen hubs in push for 2024. Next. So, is deuterium going to happen? Is it real? Is it fake? The answer, I think, is nobody knows. Right? Will the day come when the technology will allow it to be extracted, to be commercially viable, and make Singapore, the Philippines, a very rich country? Or is there deuterium in the first place in the Philippine seabed? Nobody knows. So why am I talking about this one? If when Singapore became independent in 1965, and we told you, Singapore has a dream, we are going to be the oil refining center of the region. Many people will laugh, right? Or if Singapore said, we are going to be the economic miracle in modern times, which my country has often been described today, many people will laugh. And in 1965, which country was Singapore modeled after? The Philippines. Because in 1965, the Philippines was the economic and development darling of Southeast Asia. So what I'm trying to say is, in my humble opinion, sometimes it's good to have a dream. Because when you have a dream, you have hope. Maybe deuterium is fake news. Maybe it will never happen. But you can change your dream along the way. And at the end of the day, the outcome will always be better. But now, I have news from a very reliable source that an MOU between the Philippines and the United States will soon be signed. So, will this be the economic miracle for the Philippines? Just a very brief, deuterium has been called, it's probably the cheapest, the most, truly renewable, low-cost energy, right, if it really happens. And, next. Okay. The Singapore economic success model, or the Singapore economic miracle. I have spoken in maybe more than 40 countries. And everywhere I go, even in countries that I don't speak, they always say, you know how many presidents and prime ministers have announced that they want to be the next Singapore? Many. So what is it about the Singapore economic miracle? And can it be adapted to the Philippines? Next. In Islamic finance, there's a concept called the sharing economy. So for today's purpose, actually I'm talking about sharing between the government and the people. Okay, next. Economic performance. Number one city with the best potential. Number one, UN Human Capital Index. Top 3 in the world for foreign trade and investment. Next. Competitiveness and business environment. The world's easiest place to do business. Top 2 most competitive city in the world. Best business environment in Asia Pacific in the world. Asia's most network ready country. I can go on and on and on, but I won't, because then you won't have time left for lunch or the next speaker. But today, I believe, Singapore has the highest number of global top ranking accolades compared to any country in the world. Next. I will not be doing justice if I only tell you the fairy tale without the bad and the ugly, right? So we have some poor rankings as well. Let's look at some of these poor rankings. 149 inequality index. That means the gap between the rich and the poor is very big. 129 for press freedom. 126 most unhappy. 146 most emotionless people in the world, and the fastest walkers in the world according to these studies. Next. Second lowest fertility in the world. Second least likely to help a stranger out of 135 countries. 40 out of 41 countries for libido. Most expensive in the world. Let me talk a bit about the 40 out of 41 countries in libido. Everybody knows the meaning of libido, right? Okay. Actually, this ranking is not a bad ranking. It's a very good ranking. Because how do you measure libido? You ask people, right? How often do you have sex? Okay. How good was it? How do you rate your performance, right? So Singaporeans are very honest people. They tell the truth. And that's why the ranking is so low. So why is this a good ranking? If you want to go to a country to do business, you want to go to a country where people are very honest, right? As Professor Digno mentioned, right? You said honesty, right? You all know, right? You need to have it. And that's why it's a good ranking. Because from this you can tell, if you come to Singapore to do business, chances are you meet more honest people relative to other countries. Next. A key contribution to the economic success of Singapore is something that very few people know. And that is, we have a very unique fiscal policy. From a cash flow perspective, we may not be spending any money on healthcare, pensions, or public housing. In other words, the inflows exceeds the outflows every year. And partly because of this, we have tons of money that we can use for economic development and social development. See, most countries run deficits. They are short of cash. Or Singapore, right? We have too much of it. And this is a very unique fiscal policy that has contributed to Singapore's success. Look at these numbers. Wow. In terms of budget surpluses, we regularly have the highest budget surplus per capita in the world. Look at the amount of budget surpluses. Now you see budget surpluses and IMF fiscal reporting guidelines budget surpluses. But this is I think only Professor Glorio who understand this accounting concept. IMF fiscal accounting which is on cash flows, and the government's budget accounting, which does not take into account some of the inflows and outflows. But you can see the big number. And it's estimated that our reserve today is about $1.9 trillion. So what is this sharing economy, sharing between the government and the people that has led arguably to Singapore's success? Well, it depends on the extent and the applicability of the sharing. And I'll give you some examples. I'm going to talk a bit about public pensions, which in Singapore we call the Central Provident Fund. And we'll talk a bit about public housing. Next. Our public pension fund, the government keeps part of the returns, and that is estimated to be about 12 billion a year. So now you know why, right? Singapore, in a way, is so successful. Now imagine, you look at countries like in the Europe, they're all running deficits, right? If the politicians can convince the people to let the government keep, say, 0.5% of the return on all their pension funds, I think all the deficits will go away. Right? So this concept of sharing, of course, sharing depends a great deal on trust. You know, like many of you said, in how many countries do the people trust the government a great deal? Not many today, right? Okay. Next. So I don't know, in the Philippines, will this work? I don't know, right? As Ronald Higley knows it, you know, as your RD, I'm not here to tell you how to do it, what to do. You will figure it out yourself. Of course, we can try and work it out together. Next. Before I go on, I will switch a bit and talk about sending a message to all the researchers today. First, I want to congratulate all the researchers for receiving your certificates and your awards for the research you have done. What has your research got to do with my topic on public housing? I was teaching part-time for about more than 2 decades. And if you are doing research in Singapore, it's likely your professor will ask you these questions. What is your original contribution to the field? What is your original contribution to your community or to society at large? How significant is your research to the field? How significant it is to your community and society? And the most important question, now that you have finished your research thesis or your project, what are you going to do in the future? Are you going to campaign for your research so that you will lead to better policies? What are you going to do to lead to change for the better plans for the future, for your community, for your city, for your province, for your company, for your university, whatever. So, what has that got to do with my topic on how most countries can solve their public housing problems? You see, about 30 years ago, there was one topic that I knew nothing about, and it was public housing. But then it was very strange, because at that time, hardly anybody was doing any research on public housing. And so I said, well, if nobody is doing research, I think public housing is going to be a big problem. By the way, I went back to school in Turin, Italy in September for 2 weeks at the School of Regulation, to go back to school at 69 years old to learn about regulation of public goods and services, like public housing. And so today, right, I've written a few thousand articles on public housing. I've made hundreds of speeches on public housing. I speak on public housing very often. Why? Because it is increasingly becoming a very big problem for many cities provinces and countries. So when I say, oh, I can speak free, I will fly there and pay my own household, right? How you may be able to solve your public housing problem. Also, I'm very popular. And now the secret, how to solve your public housing problem. The problem with public housing in practically every country or city is that every house they build, they lose money, right? And so they have a problem. So the solution, if you follow the Singapore public housing model, by the way, Singapore has won the UN Habitat Award for public housing. 80% of the population in Singapore lives in public housing. And 80% of those who live in public housing actually own their public house. So, the secret is so simple conceptually. If the problem is every house you build, you lose money, you cannot build a lot of houses, you make a 1% profit on every house that you build. And then you use the 1% profit to help those who are very, very poor to buy the public housing at an even cheaper price with bigger subsidies depending on how poor they are. Simple, right? So it's a win-win solution. The government gets to build as many public housing as they want, so they get voted in all the time. That's why we have a one-party parliament for 50 odd years. 90% of the parliamentarians are from the same party. And one reason is because our public housing policy. It's a win-win for the people because, hey, where can you find a country where 80% of the people live in public housing and 80% own their public house? And a lot of people make money from public housing, because after 5 years you have lived in it, you can sell it away at the open market. Okay, this is the last slide. And I just want to end by saying that after 69 years, going to be 70 years, hundreds of speeches, thousands of articles, 5 books, right? To be honest, it has been a great disappointment because most of the ideas that I share around the world, very few have come to fruition. But I'm happy to say there are some shining examples. Let me give you some of them. In Africa, Rwanda, if you look at what's happening today, is one of the best in terms of economic and social development. Why? Because they copied the Singapore model in a big way. In Central Asia, is Kazakhstan. Okay? They send their civil servants to Singapore for training. So why does it work for some countries and why it doesn't work for so many countries? To me, there's no simple answer, but I can't leave you with no answer, right? I guess it's political will. How many politicians were there to do something that has never been done before in their own country? Let me end by making a wish. I hope I can continue to help people, countries, cities to solve the public housing problem. And the biggest obstacle is, I think even in countries like Hong Kong or perhaps in Philippines, the biggest obstacle to the public housing solution is the private property developers and the tycoons. Because they all think if you follow the Singapore model, it will affect the development and the profits of the private property sector. That is not the case. Look at the Singapore experience and history. Both the private and public housing property sectors went through the roof. And with that, I thank you.
That's good. Thank you, sir. You are the best speaker,
Thank you very much, Honorable Dr. Fellow Leong Zeyan, for that very informative presentation.